Okay, so you want to own an undersea cable. You want to own a piece of the internet's actual backbone. Not a server, not a data center, not a cloud platform. You want the physical glass fiber that carries 95% of all international data traffic between continents. You want the pipe underneath the ocean that every email, every video call, every financial transaction, every Netflix stream passes through on its way from one side of the world to the other. You want the infrastructure that, by some estimates, contributed $649 billion to the US economy alone in 2019, roughly 3% of GDP, from a garden hose lying on the ocean floor. Sounds like an obvious gold mine. It is not a gold mine, because the business of owning undersea cables is one of the most capital-intensive, technically brutal, regulatory complex infrastructure investments in the world. And it has a structural quirk that has already destroyed some of the largest telecom companies in history. Companies that spent billions building exactly what everyone agreed the world needed, got the technology right, got the timing right, and still went bankrupt because of one mechanism in the economics they didn't fully account for. This video is going to show you exactly how undersea cable ownership works, where the money comes from, what the ongoing costs look like, why the price of the thing you own falls every single year, and why the most sophisticated technology companies on the planet are still pouring billions into the seabed. Here's what you're actually buying when you own an undersea cable. On the surface, it looks like you're buying a pipe, a physical conduit that carries digital signals from one continent to another. But that's not what you're actually selling. What you're selling is latency. The irreplaceable, physics-constrained, absolutely non-negotiable value of the shortest possible path between 2 points on opposite sides of an ocean. Light travels through optical fiber at about 2/3 the speed of light in a vacuum. You cannot improve on that. No satellite, no future technology, no engineering innovation changes the fact that a signal bouncing up to a geostationary orbit and back adds approximately 600 milliseconds of delay per round trip, meaning satellite internet will always be 2 to 4 times slower in latency than a properly routed undersea cable. For a financial trader executing microsecond arbitrage strategies, for a real-time cloud gaming platform, for a live video production satellite uplink, for an AI training cluster moving petabytes of data between data centers on different continents, and that latency difference is not a minor technical preference. It is the entire product. An undersea cable owner doesn't sell bandwidth, they sell physics. And physics, unlike most things in business, cannot be commoditized by a competitor with a better algorithm. Keep that reframe in mind. Because what follows is going to show you exactly how that physics premium gets extracted, and exactly when it doesn't. Let's start with what it actually costs to build one of these things. The physical cable itself is deceiving. In the deep ocean, it's roughly the diameter of a garden hose. It weighs about 1.4 tons per kilometer. It contains hair-thin optical fibers bundled inside layers of high-strength steel wire, polyethylene insulation, and copper conductor tubing that carries the electrical power needed to run repeaters along the route. Near shore, where the cable faces the most risk from fishing trawlers and ship anchors, it gets armored further. Thicker, heavier, buried in the seabed by underwater plows during installation. The cost per kilometer of the cable itself ranges from around $6,000 to $20,000, depending on fiber count, armoring specification, and water depth. That sounds manageable. It is not the hard part. Add the repeaters. Every 60 to 80 kilometers along the route, you need a powered amplifier to regenerate the optical signal before it degrades. Each repeater costs approximately $200,000. A transatlantic route of 7,000 kilometers means roughly 90 to 100 repeaters at $200,000 each. That's $18 to $20 million just in repeaters before you've even bought the cable. Add the cable landing stations, the onshore facilities at each end of the route where the cable comes ashore and connects to the terrestrial internet backbone. A purpose-built landing station costs several $1,000,000 each. You need at least 2, 1 per end. Some projects use existing facilities to cut costs, but purpose-built stations that support multiple cables often run $10 to $15 million. Add the cable ship. You don't own a cable ship. Nobody outside the 6 or 7 companies that actually build these systems does. You contract one. A cable-laying vessel costs upward of $200 million to build and operate. and the day rate for chartering one during installation runs into the tens of thousands of dollars daily. On a transoceanic project, the ship may be at sea for months. Add the survey work. Before you lay anything, you need a detailed route survey, bathymetric mapping of the seabed, hazard identification, fishery activity assessments, regulatory consultation with every nation whose territorial waters or exclusive economic zones you'll cross. That process alone can take 1 to 2 years and cost tens of millions of dollars. Put all of this together and a transatlantic cable, roughly 7,000 kilometers, runs approximately $250 million from conception to first service. A trans-Pacific route, at greater distance and depth, reaches $400 million or higher. Shorter regional routes can come in at $30 to $80 million. Projects using the latest space division multiplexing technology, which packs more fiber pairs into the same cable footprint, are now being quoted in the $350 to $500 million range for full transatlantic systems. That's your entry ticket, but the entry ticket is not the trap. The pre-launch costs are where projects quietly bleed to death before they earn a dollar. The permitting process for an undersea cable crossing international waters is not a single approval from a single authority. It is a sequential negotiation with every national telecommunications regulator in every country whose waters the cable crosses or touches. A trans-Pacific cable from the US to Japan crosses or borders the exclusive economic zones of multiple nations and requires separate landing licenses in each. The process typically takes 2 to 3 years from initial application to final authorization. Some cables have taken longer. In the United States, the Federal Communications Commission must approve submarine cable landing licenses for any cable landing on American shores. That process involves public comment periods, national security review by the Committee for the Assessment of Foreign Participation in the United States Telecommunications Services sector, which includes the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, and the Department of Homeland Security, and environmental impact assessment under the National Environmental Policy Act. Each of those reviews can add months. If the cable involves foreign ownership from a country with strained U.S. relations, the review can take years. Marine permits on top of that. Environmental impact assessments covering potential effects on seabed ecosystems, marine mammal habitats, and fishing grounds. Fisheries coordination agreements with commercial fishing industry groups in coastal nations along the route. These are not formalities. Unresolved fishery conflicts have delayed major cable projects by 12 to 18 months. Then there's insurance. Undersea cables carry comprehensive marine insurance covering physical damage, third-party liability, and business interruption. Premium costs are non-trivial. They run as a percentage of the total cable replacement value, which on a $300 million cable means annual premiums that run into several million dollars. During all of this, all of the surveying, permitting, regulatory approval, insurance procurement, and pre-sale negotiation with anchor tenants who need to see progress before they commit, the cable earns zero revenue. Investors are carrying the full capital cost, with interest compounding, while the world keeps generating data demand that the cable doesn't yet exist to serve. The cable that earns its highest returns is the cable that gets to market first. Every month of regulatory delay is a month of peak-priced capacity that goes unsold. That timing risk is real, and it is not under the owner's control. Now let's talk about how the money actually comes in, because this is where the business model gets genuinely interesting. Revenue Stream 1. Indefeasible Rights of Use, or IRUs. This is the dominant commercial model in the industry, and it works differently than almost any other infrastructure asset. An IRU is a 20-year license to use a specific amount of capacity on the cable, typically defined in terms of fiber pairs or wavelength channels, purchased in a single upfront lump sum at or near the cable's ready-for-service date. The buyer, a carrier, an ISP, an enterprise, gets guaranteed exclusive use of that capacity for 2 decades. The cable owner gets a large cash payment almost immediately. On a $250 million transatlantic cable with a typical fill rate, IRU sales at pricing ranges of $4,000 to $12,000 per month per 100 gigabits per second wavelength, converted to upfront lump sums over 20 years, can cover 30 to 60% of construction costs within the first year of operation. After signing an IRU, the buyer then pays the cable owner an annual operations and maintenance fee, typically 2.5% to 4% of the IRU purchase price. That's the recurring annual income on top of the upfront capital recovery. For cable owners, this creates an unusual financial structure. Front-loaded, lump-sum capital recovery, followed by a long tail of annual maintenance fees that compound over 20 years. Revenue Stream 2. Short-term capacity leases. These are 1 to 5 year contracts priced per megabit or gigabit per second of monthly throughput. Unlike IRUs, these float with market pricing. They're more expensive per unit when demand is high, cheaper when supply surges. Carriers buying short-term leases are betting that prices will fall as new cables come online. Cable owners selling leases are betting demand will hold prices up. On established routes with multiple competing cables, the carrier usually wins that bet. Revenue Stream 3. Lit wavelength services, where the cable owner provides the optical transmission equipment in addition to the fiber. Effectively a managed service rather than raw fiber access. Lit services command a meaningful price premium over dark fiber or raw capacity IRUs because the buyer doesn't have to invest in their own transmission gear. On a per-unit basis, lit wavelength services can earn 2 to 3 times the margin of raw capacity sales. Revenue Stream 4. Co-location and interconnection services at landing stations. A cable landing station isn't just where the cable comes ashore. It's where multiple cables, carriers, and enterprises can interconnect with each other. Operators can charge for rack space, cross-connects, and transit services within that facility. On a well-positioned landing station connecting multiple cable systems, this can generate $5 to $15 million annually in recurring co-location revenue that has almost no marginal cost once the facility is built. Now let's look at what it costs to own a cable after it's in the water. The fixed operating cost of an active undersea cable system is surprisingly manageable relative to the construction cost, but absolutely relentless. Annual operating costs for a mid-tier transatlantic cable system typically run between $8 and $15 million per year. That covers landing station power and staff, network operations center monitoring, maintenance agreement premiums, insurance, and regulatory compliance across multiple jurisdictions. The cable maintenance agreement, the contract the cable owner holds with a consortium of cable repair ships that guarantees a repair vessel will be dispatched when a fault occurs, is one of the largest ongoing fixed costs. These agreements run several million dollars annually and give the cable owner priority access to a repair fleet that is globally constrained. There are only about 60 purpose-built cable repair vessels in operation worldwide. When one cable goes down, the queue for a ship is real. And cables do go down. The International Cable Protection Committee records approximately 150 to 200 faults on submarine cable systems globally every year. Around 70 to 86% of those faults are caused by human activities, specifically fishing trawlers dragging gear across shallow water cable routes and ship anchors striking cables in busy ports and shipping lanes. Natural hazards, earthquakes, underwater landslides, typhoons account for most of the remainder. Each fiber optic cable repair costs between $500,000 and $3 million per incident, depending on depth and location. The repair vessel must steam to the fault location, which can take multiple days, then grapple the cable from the seabed, cut out the damaged section, splice in a replacement, and lower it back, a process averaging 10 to 20 days per repair. During that time, the affected capacity is either offline or degraded. The deeper structural cost issue is this. Nearly all of those fixed operating costs continue regardless of how much capacity is actually sold. If the cable has sold 80% of its capacity, the maintenance agreement still costs the same. The insurance premium is the same. The landing station power bill is the same. The regulatory compliance burden is the same. A cable that sells 30% of its capacity pays essentially the same operating cost as a cable that sells 90%. That fixed cost variable revenue mismatch is the engine of risk in this business, and it becomes catastrophic under one specific condition. That condition is what I'd call the supply surge problem, and understanding it requires understanding one number. Bandwidth demand roughly doubles every 3 years. That part of the business is broadly reliable. But here's the trapdoor that has repeatedly destroyed cable owners who ignored it. New cables don't add capacity incrementally. they add it in enormous steps. A single new transatlantic cable system, using modern space division multiplexing technology, can carry more cumulative capacity than every cable previously on that route combined. When that cable enters service, prices fall fast. Industry analysts have documented per gigabyte data transfer prices falling 15 to 20% annually on established routes in years when new cables come online. That's not an estimate. It's the observed rate of price deflation on active routes over the past decade. A cable that sold long-term IRU capacity at $10,000 per month per wavelength in 2018 is now competing with new cables offering equivalent capacity for $4,000 to $6,000 per month. The owners of the 2018 cables still locked in their 20-year IRU contracts. That part of the revenue is protected. But any capacity they didn't sell in 2018 and are now trying to sell on short-term leases is worth less than half what it was. And any borrowing they did against future revenue projections is now collateralized against a price that has collapsed. The second half of that trapdoor. In the last decade, content providers have entered the market at a scale that has permanently restructured who demands capacity and who supplies it. As of now, Google, Meta, Amazon, and Microsoft collectively consume approximately 75% of all international bandwidth. On the Atlantic, 100% of newly planned cable investments are content provider-led. On the Pacific, 80%. These companies don't buy capacity from traditional cable owners on the commercial market. They build their own cables and fill them with their own traffic. This simultaneously removes the largest segment of demand from the wholesale market and adds new supply that further drives down prices for the traditional cable operators who remain. Here is the thing nobody tells you. When Google builds a cable, it is not trying to become a cable operator. It is trying to stop paying cable operators. And every cable Google builds is one fewer large customer for the cable owners who sell to the commercial market. Gary Winnick understood this story better than almost anyone in 1997, which is exactly why his company, Global Crossing, became one of the most instructive failures in the history of undersea cable investment. Winnick founded Global Crossing in 1997 with one clear insight. Internet bandwidth demand was about to explode. Transoceanic cable capacity was scarce, and whoever built the largest private fiber network connecting the major global markets first would control the bottleneck and earn extraordinary returns. He was correct about the demand. He was correct about the bottleneck. He was wrong about one thing. Global Crossing raised $750 million in its 1998 IPO and proceeded to build submarine cables across the Atlantic and the Pacific, connecting 4 continents and more than 200 cities in 27 countries. At its peak, the company's market capitalization hit $55 billion, greater than General Motors at the time. By 2001, Global Crossing had spent nearly $15 billion building a global fiber network of over 100,000 miles. The vision was genuinely audacious and genuinely real. What Winnick did not adequately account for was the fact that every other company with access to capital made the same calculation simultaneously. Multiple competitors built parallel transoceanic cables on the same routes at the same time. Supply expanded far faster than demand could absorb it. Prices collapsed. In the last quarter, Global Crossing reported before filing for bankruptcy, the company lost $3.3 billion on revenue of just $286 million, because the revenue it had projected was tied to capacity prices that no longer existed in a market suddenly drowning in fiber. On January 28, 2002, Global Crossing filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection with approximately $12.4 billion in debt, one of the largest corporate failures in U.S. history at the time. Gary Winnick had personally sold approximately $734 million in company shares before the filing. Thousands of employees lost their jobs. Investors lost essentially everything. The infrastructure itself survived. Physical cables don't go bankrupt. Their holding companies do. The fiber that Global Crossing had laid was acquired by Level 3 Communications and Singapore Technologies Telemedia, repackaged at a fraction of the original construction cost, and relit for new customers at the new, lower market prices. Parts of that original Global Crossing backbone still carry international data traffic today. The company's vision was right. The capital structure and the competitive timing were catastrophically wrong. Let me walk you through what good and bad years look like in concrete numbers, using a mid-scale example. A single transatlantic cable system with a total construction cost of $300 million. Good year scenario. The cable enters service in year 1 with aggressive pre-sales already signed. IRU sales within the first 18 months cover $120 million in upfront cash. 40% of construction cost recovered before the second year. Short-term leased capacity fills another 30% of remaining fiber at blended rates of $6,000 per month, per 100 gigabits per second wavelength, generating approximately $22 million annually. Co-location and lit service revenues at landing stations add $8 million. Annual O&M fees from IRU holders add another $4.5 million. Total annual revenue, approximately $34.5 million in recurring income, plus the front-loaded IRU capital. Annual operating costs, $12 million for maintenance agreements, station operations, insurance, and compliance. Annual net operating income, approximately $22.5 million, a 65% operating margin on recurring income. At that rate, the non-IRU portion of construction cost recovers inside 8 years. Bad year scenario. The cable enters service 6 months late due to regulatory delays in one host nation, a not uncommon occurrence. During those 6 months, a competitor's newer cable with higher capacity comes online at the same routes. Pre-sale IRU pricing has to be discounted 20% to remain competitive. The expected $120 million in year 1 IRUs comes in at $96 million. Short-term lease pricing collapses as competing capacity enters the market. Annual lease revenue falls to $11 million. Co-location revenues hold roughly steady at $7 million. One major fault event, a fishing trawler cuts the cable in a shallow coastal segment, costs $2.5 million in repair costs including the vessel mobilization, parts, and splice labor, and takes 17 days to fix. Some IRU customers invoke force majeure credits. Annual operating costs run $14.5 million, elevated by the unplanned repair. Net operating income for the year, approximately $4 million, an 85% reduction from the good year. The difference between a good year and a bad year in this business is roughly $18.5 million in operating income on a $300 million asset. That gap, driven largely by a 6-month regulatory delay and one trawler in the wrong place, is what separates a cable owner with a manageable payback period from one renegotiating covenants with their project finance lenders. So why do sophisticated investors, and now some of the largest technology companies in history, keep pouring money into the seabed? The first reason is control. A cable owner controls the latency, reliability, and capacity of their own international network. For a company like Google, Microsoft, or Meta, that control is worth more than any commercial market alternative. When you own the cable, you set the performance standards. You don't wait for a carrier to resolve a fault. You don't pay wholesale market premiums during supply crunches. The second reason is long-term positioning. The fixed costs of a cable are largely set at construction. The capacity of a cable, however, can be upgraded over time as optical amplification and wavelength technology improve, often without touching the wet plant. A cable laid in 2020 with 16 fiber pairs might carry 10 times the capacity by 2030 using improved terminal equipment, at marginal incremental cost. For owners with patient capital, the long-term value of a cable route is substantially higher than its initial operating economics suggest. The third reason is that on niche, underserved, or single-provider routes, pricing doesn't collapse the way it does on the overbuilt transatlantic and trans-Pacific corridors. Regional cables connecting island nations, emerging markets with no existing fiber connectivity, or specialized industrial environments, offshore oil platforms, Arctic data routes, Nordic data center clusters, can earn returns that look completely different from a contested transatlantic route. The discipline is finding routes where you won't be commoditized before you recover your capital. The fourth reason, the quiet one, is infrastructure's relationship with inflation. Cable operating costs are largely fixed in nominal terms over the life of a 25-year IRU. If inflation runs at 4 to 5% annually for a decade, the real value of fixed operating costs falls substantially, while the replacement value of the infrastructure rises. For long-term institutional investors, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, infrastructure funds, that inflation hedging property is genuinely attractive, independent of the operating economics in any given year. Here's what you need to understand about undersea cables. We've been talking about them as internet infrastructure, as the pipes the world's data moves through. But that's the wrong frame. An undersea cable is not a pipe. It is a bet on the future shape of geography itself. The internet exists in people's minds as something weightless, distributed, cloud-like, everywhere at once. But the physics of how that experience is actually delivered is anchored, literally, to the seabed. The route the cable takes, the landing points, the nations it touches, the latency it creates between specific pairs of cities, locks in a set of geographic relationships that can last 25 years. Whoever owns those routes owns the topology of one small piece of the world's information architecture. What makes undersea cable ownership genuinely different from almost any other infrastructure investment is that you are not just buying a building or a road or a power line. You are buying a permanent physical argument about which places in the world should be connected to each other and how fast. When that argument aligns with how the world actually develops, when the cities you chose to connect turn out to be exactly the ones that need to talk to each other most urgently, the asset becomes quietly irreplaceable. When it doesn't, when the route you chose gets commoditized, or the market you bet on develops more slowly than projected, or a competitor lays the same route 6 months before you, the fixed costs keep running while the economics collapse. The cable on the ocean floor doesn't know the difference between a good business decision and a bad one. It just sits there in the dark, carrying light, waiting to find out which it was.